The humming of the computers in the advanced mission control room was the only sound that filled the tense air, broken occasionally by the anxious tapping of fingers on keyboards. Marcus Carter's eyes widened as he traced the final numbers on the complex matrix displayed on the holo-screen, his mind racing against the ticking clock. The launch window to Mars was closing. Only 12 months left until the opportunity vanished, and the team of top scientists was at a deadlock. No one had been able to solve the anomaly in the trajectory calculations that threatened the safety of the crew. Marcus's pulse quickened, and with a deep breath, he entered the equations with precision. Watching as the results aligned perfectly, a voice cut sharply through the silence. Dr. Robert Hensley, the lead researcher, stood in the doorway scowling at Marcus. "What are you doing here?" "This is not your station," he barked. Marcus's jaw tightened, words ready but controlled. The room felt charged, electric with confrontation. Tension spiraled as Hensley approached, anger simmering while the screens glowed, displaying the solution that would save the mission. Footsteps echoed behind them. Director Evelyn Sinclair entered, her eyes sharp, scanning the scene, sensing immediately that something critical had been overlooked. In that instant, the hierarchy of the agency, the prejudices, and the oversight were about to collide with undeniable truth. Weeks earlier, Marcus Carter had walked into the gleaming corridors of the Nova Exploration Agency, excitement and hope clinging to his every step. Born in a modest neighborhood of Atlanta, he had fought through years of underfunded schools and scholarships. Earning his PhD in astrophysics from a public university, one of only 3 nationwide with his level of expertise in celestial mechanics. Yet upon arrival, the reception was lukewarm, filtered through assumptions about his background and skin color. He had been offered the role of an assistant, fetching coffee, delivering messages, organizing paperwork, tasks far beneath the scope of his brilliance. His hands had once crafted equations that predicted planetary motion with stunning accuracy, now carrying trays between offices. He bore it quietly, studying the elite scientists in action, absorbing knowledge and waiting for the moment to prove himself. Each dismissed glance, each subtle snub, was a reminder that talent alone was not enough to break prejudice. The agency's mission to send humans to Mars was publicized as humanity's boldest step. Yet Marcus understood the silent cracks running through its foundation, and he knew that if given a chance, he could fix them. His curiosity became a private rebellion, memorizing algorithms and anomalies that even the agency's top minds struggled to decipher. Evenings found Marcus alone in the labyrinthine research halls, scanning datasets, recalculating trajectories, and mapping gravitational interferences. He moved with caution, aware that any misstep would earn reprimand, yet driven by an urgency no one else could sense. The air of secrecy around the Mars mission was suffocating, alarms of failure lurking in every line of code. One night he noticed a recurring pattern, a subtle deviation in the orbital vectors that everyone else had overlooked, a mistake that could spell disaster if uncorrected. Heart-pounding, he cross-referenced the complex numbers, the matrix bending under his expertise, and the solution emerged. The realization hit like lightning. The anomaly wasn't a random error but a solvable problem, one that required the exact skill set only a handful of scientists in the country possessed, and Marcus had them. He could almost hear the collective gasp of the team he wasn't supposed to impress. The very problem threatening the mission's launch was now his to fix, and in that isolation, Marcus felt both fear and exhilaration. He entered the final calculations, the holo-screen illuminating his face in shades of triumph and apprehension. Little did he know, his actions would ignite a confrontation that would unravel the agency's assumptions about who deserved to lead. Dr. Robert Hensley's glare burned as he stepped closer, fingers twitching with disbelief and indignation. "You weren't assigned here," he growled, eyes narrowing at the solution displayed in glowing clarity. Marcus met his gaze steadily, the weight of knowledge, integrity, and suppressed frustration grounding his stance. The numbers were incorrect. The trajectory was unsafe. "I fixed it," he replied calmly, though his heartbeat thundered in his chest. Hensley scoffed, taking a step back, his pride wounded by the audacity of a young assistant solving a problem beyond the limits he believed anyone could reach. Tension crackled as if the very air in the room resisted this challenge to hierarchy. At that precise moment, Director Evelyn Sinclair's presence filled the doorway, authoritative and composed. Her eyes swept the room, landing on Marcus, and recognition dawned. The solution was correct. precise, indispensable, the kind of work she knew only an expert of the highest caliber could produce. Questions surfaced, silent but heavy. Why had he been sidelined? Why had HR and its assumptions ignored his credentials? The confrontation between Hensley and Marcus froze, the truth hanging over the room like the tension before a rocket launch. Sinclair's voice broke the silence, cutting to the core. Explain everything. The unraveling began as Marcus recounted his journey, his background, the overlooked qualifications, the years of unnoticed brilliance, and how he had patiently observed before acting. Evelyn Sinclair's expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief, then to resolve, her mind racing to correct the oversight that HR's prejudice had caused. The implications were monumental. A mission to Mars was at risk, a team blinded by assumptions, a launch window slipping away, and one unrecognized genius capable of saving it all. Hensley's indignation faltered under the weight of undeniable skill, his earlier authority suddenly irrelevant. Marcus, once invisible and underestimated, now held the key to humanity's most daring journey. As the tension in the room broke into awe and hesitant admiration, Marcus felt the culmination of years of struggle crystallize into this moment of vindication. The narrative of prejudice, doubt, and dismissal collided with brilliance, courage, and justice. Every calculation, every overlooked detail, every subtle act of defiance had led to this. Proof that talent cannot be confined by assumptions, that knowledge demands recognition, and that sometimes the most brilliant minds rise from the most unlikely places. The silence after Director Evelyn Sinclair's words was suffocating, pressing against the walls of the room as though the building itself was waiting for Marcus's explanation. His chest rose and fell heavily, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. He described the subtle anomaly in the equations, how the orbital vectors would have torn the ship apart upon re-entry into Mars's atmosphere. He explained how he had tracked the mistake for weeks, how the solution revealed itself only after nights of endless recalculations. The brilliance of his work shone in every word. Undeniable, irrefutable. Sinclair's sharp eyes softened, not with pity but with recognition. Recognition that this young man standing before her was no assistant, no errand boy, but a scientist of rare caliber. Dr. Hensley, on the other hand, seethed, his authority crumbling under the revelation that his team, his pride, had overlooked what Marcus had accomplished alone. A murmur ran through the few researchers who had gathered, their stares a mix of disbelief and dawning respect. In that moment, Marcus was no longer invisible. He was the axis on which the entire mission now turned. Yet Marcus's mind, even as it basked in the breakthrough, spiraled back to the beginning, to the day he first entered the Nova Exploration Agency. The pristine glass walls, the immaculate floors, the air heavy with ambition, it had felt like stepping into a temple of science, a place where brilliance was meant to transcend barriers. But his excitement was quickly met with a cold slap of reality. His qualifications, listed in fine detail, were dismissed with polite nods and hidden smirks. A man in HR glancing over his resume had muttered something about too much theory, not enough polish, while handing him a badge labeled assistant. He had been sent to a cramped office, where stacks of schedules and coffee requests filled his desk. Every morning he carried trays into rooms where conversations about orbital mechanics and spacecraft design unfolded, conversations he could have led, if only they had let him. The burn of humiliation simmered, but Marcus swallowed it, choosing observation. Still, he couldn't stand by and watch a mission destined for failure, a dream that could crumble under the weight of prejudice. One night, standing before the massive holo-display, Marcus saw it, the anomaly that no one else could solve, the equation that had tied the entire research team in knots. His fingers danced over the interface, heart pounding as he rewrote the path of humanity's greatest venture. For hours he labored in silence, his mind a storm of numbers and possibilities, until at last, the solution gleamed before him like light breaking through darkness. Relief washed over him, but so did fear. He had crossed the boundary, stepped into territory forbidden to him. That was the night Dr. Hensley found him. Fury laced in every syllable as he accused Marcus of trespassing where he didn't belong. Yet Marcus's calm reply, the certainty in his voice, shattered the illusion of incompetence they had cloaked him in. The confrontation escalated, harsh words echoing off the walls, until Sinclair's arrival turned the room into a battlefield of truths. Director Evelyn Sinclair's gaze locked on Marcus, her sharp voice slicing through the air like a blade. "Repeat what you just said," she demanded, her tone carrying the weight of authority. Marcus steadied himself, his eyes flicking briefly toward the glowing equations before returning to hers. "The anomaly wasn't a system glitch," he explained, each word deliberate, heavy. "The trajectory calculations you've been relying on would tear the vessel apart during Mars's atmospheric entry. The crew would never make it alive. I recalculated the vectors, corrected the deviations, and stabilized the orbit." Silence gripped the room as the reality sank in. The mission, humanity's greatest hope, had been seconds away from collapse, saved not by the celebrated lead scientist, but by the assistant who fetched their coffee. Sinclair's eyes narrowed, scanning him not with skepticism, but with the piercing evaluation of someone reassessing everything they thought they knew. Dr. Hensley's face twisted in fury, the arrogance of his position crumbling under Marcus's calm authority. "This is absurd," he shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "You expect us to believe that this assistant, who has no clearance, no role here, somehow solved a problem that my team has spent months on. He doesn't belong here. He shouldn't even have access to this lab." His voice cracked, desperation seeping through his anger. Marcus stood tall, refusing to bow under the storm. "With respect, Doctor," Marcus replied firmly, "I didn't stumble into this solution. I studied it night after night. I trained for this, specialized in celestial mechanics when no one believed someone like me could. The truth isn't about belonging to this lab, it's about who can save the mission." The room fell silent again, the only sound the hum of machinery. As Marcus's words landed like thunder, Sinclair's eyes flicked toward the glowing numbers and her breath caught. The equations were flawless, elegant in their simplicity, the kind of solution that could only come from a mind deeply attuned to the language of the cosmos. She turned sharply to Hensley, her tone icy. "Tell me why this man is listed as an assistant," she demanded, her voice carrying the weight of command. Hensley faltered, his lips tightening, but it was another researcher in the corner who spoke up, voice hesitant. He applied for the astrophysics specialist position, Director, but HR flagged his background, said his education wasn't from the elite universities we usually hire from. They reassigned him." A chill swept through the room as Sinclair's expression hardened, her mind piecing together the unspoken truth. Prejudice had blinded them, had almost doomed the mission, and standing before her was the proof of their failure. Marcus clenched his fists, the memories flashing through his mind like shards of glass. The day he'd received the offer letter, his mother's tears of joy, the pride of his community, all shattered the moment he realized he'd been hired to deliver coffee, not solve equations. He remembered the humiliation of carrying trays into rooms where debates raged about calculations he could solve in his sleep, the sting of dismissive glances, the whispers that he didn't fit the image of a scientist destined for greatness. Yet he had swallowed it, channeling the pain into silent defiance, building his private rebellion equation by equation. Now the weight of those years pressed on him, but so did the clarity. This was his moment. The moment they could no longer ignore who he truly was. Sinclair stepped closer, her voice steady, resonant with both anger and resolve. "Mr. Carter," she said firmly, "your work may have just saved the mission, and I need to know. Are you ready to take the place you should have been given from the start?" Marcus's breath hitched, the enormity of her words hitting him like the roar of a rocket launch. His eyes met hers, a storm of emotions swirling within, vindication, fear, determination. "I was born ready," he answered softly but with unshakable conviction. Hensley recoiled, the foundations of his authority crumbling as Sinclair's decision loomed. A seismic shift that would reshape the future of the mission and Marcus's destiny. Dr. Hensley's jaw tightened, but his silence betrayed more than anger. It carried the weight of fear. His eyes darted toward the glowing equations as if they were evidence against him, and for a fleeting moment Marcus noticed something else hidden behind the rage: panic. It wasn't just wounded pride. There was something Hensley was hiding, something that made Marcus's breakthrough not just an embarrassment but a threat. Sinclair, perceptive as ever, caught it too. Her gaze lingered on Hensley, sharp as a blade. "Doctor," she said, her voice like steel, "why does this discovery shake you so deeply?" If the solution is correct, it saves the mission. Yet you act as though it endangers you. The room froze, the unspoken suspicion now thick in the air. Marcus felt his stomach knot. A sense that the battle he had entered was far larger than prejudice. It was about sabotage. The thought clawed at Marcus's mind. Had the errors in the trajectory been mere oversight or deliberate? The anomaly was subtle, hidden within layers of calculations, easy to dismiss as noise, but once seen clearly, it was lethal. Only someone with deep knowledge could have engineered such a trap. His pulse quickened as his suspicions turned toward Hensley, whose eyes refused to meet Sinclair's. Marcus's voice broke through the silence, steady but edged with accusation. "Those errors weren't random," he said firmly. "They were planted deliberately to make the mission fail." Gasps erupted around the room and Sinclair's stare sharpened, cutting into Hensley like a scalpel. "Is that true, Doctor?" she demanded. Hensley stammered, words stumbling, his authority unraveling. The mask of arrogance slipped, revealing the terror beneath. For the first time, Marcus saw the man's true face, not the confident leader of research, but someone cornered, desperate to protect his secret. "You don't understand," Hensley muttered, his voice breaking. The mission was doomed from the start. The funding, the politics, they wanted a scapegoat when it failed, and I was told to let it happen. The confession fell into the room like an explosion, shattering every illusion. Sinclair's breath caught, her fists tightening as the betrayal of trust rippled through her. Marcus felt rage boiling inside him. The knowledge that not only had his brilliance been suppressed by prejudice, but lives had been gambled with for politics and pride. The Mars mission wasn't just at risk of failure. It had been designed to fail. Sinclair's face hardened into resolve, her voice rising with authority. "Not anymore. Not while I'm in command, Dr. Hensley." "You're relieved of duty effective immediately." Security guards appeared as if conjured, moving in to restrain the fallen scientist, whose protests echoed weakly against the cold walls. Marcus stood frozen, his heart pounding, the magnitude of the revelation crashing into him. He had walked into the agency dismissed as nothing, only to uncover not just a deadly flaw, but a conspiracy that could have cost lives and humanity's greatest dream. Sinclair turned to him, her eyes fierce but steady. "Mr. Carter, the mission needs you more than ever. The only question now is, are you ready to step into the fire knowing the storm that comes with it?" Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as the guards escorted Dr. Hensley out of the control room, his protests fading into the sterile corridors of the agency. Yet the silence that followed was not relief. It was heavy, suffocating, charged with the weight of what had just been revealed. The researchers who remained exchanged nervous glances. The trust that once held them together fractured beyond repair. Marcus stood in the middle of it all, the glowing equations on the holo-screen casting light across his face, making him appear almost otherworldly. Sinclair's voice rang out, steady and unwavering. "The mission to Mars will continue, and it will succeed. But from this moment forward, the trajectory of this project rests in the hands of Marcus Carter." Her declaration fell like a gavel, final and absolute. Marcus felt every eye in the room pierce him, some with awe, others with quiet resentment. But none could deny the truth. He had saved them. Still, the storm was far from over. Whispers spread through the agency within hours, a mix of admiration and resistance. Some hailed Marcus as a savior, the mind who had saved humanity's greatest venture from disaster. Others resented him, unable to accept that the man they had dismissed as an errand boy was now in command of the mission's most critical equations. Emails leaked, questioning his credentials, claiming his breakthrough was a coincidence or worse, a fabrication. Marcus faced glares in hallways, muttered words behind his back, a new battle fought not with numbers but with perception. The prejudice that had caged him had not vanished. It had only changed shape, more venomous now because it feared his rise. Each step forward felt like walking through fire, but Marcus did not waver. His brilliance, once hidden, now burned too brightly to be ignored. Night after night he immersed himself in the calculations, his mind wrestling with the universe itself. He refined the trajectories, accounted for gravitational pulls, corrected fuel ratios, and simulated every possible risk. His body ached, his eyes burned, but he pressed on, driven by the image of the first human foot touching Martian soil. a dream too vast to be crushed by bias. Yet sabotage left scars deeper than he had imagined. Systems malfunctioned mysteriously. Data streams corrupted without explanation. Marcus began to suspect Hensley had not acted alone. Shadows lingered in the agency, silent enemies waiting to see him fail. The closer the mission came to success, the louder those shadows whispered, seeding doubt, eroding trust. It wasn't just math anymore. It was survival. And Marcus realized the fight for the mission was also a fight for his very place in history. The night before the scheduled launch, Marcus Carter sat alone in the vast control center, the hum of servers and blinking lights his only company. The final simulations glowed on the holo-screen, their results pristine, flawless. The mission was ready. Yet a nagging unease gripped him, a voice whispering that the storm was not yet over. He replayed the sabotage in his mind. Hensley's words about being told to let the mission fail. Who else had been pulling strings? Marcus's instincts screamed that Hensley had not acted alone. As his eyes scanned the system logs one last time, he noticed something unusual. A hidden subroutine embedded deep within the navigation code. It was subtle, almost invisible, programmed to alter the ship's trajectory after launch, sending the crew into the void. His blood ran cold. Someone was still inside the agency, waiting for him to fail. Adrenaline surged as Marcus traced the digital fingerprints of the intrusion, his fingers flying across the console. The code was masterfully hidden, the kind only a top-level engineer could insert. Marcus's stomach dropped as he recognized the signature. It belonged to Dr. Leonard Graves, the agency's chief systems engineer, a man admired by many for his brilliance and calm demeanor. The betrayal stung deeper than Hensley's rage. Graves had been one of the few who had spoken politely to Marcus, masking his duplicity with charm. Marcus's mind raced. If he exposed Graves without proof, it would be his word against a respected veteran. But if he stayed silent, the mission would die before it ever reached Mars. The weight of humanity's hope pressed against him like gravity itself, demanding a choice. When dawn broke, the agency buzzed with nervous excitement. The astronauts were already in their suits, the world's eyes fixed on the launch. Sinclair stood at the helm, her voice crisp as she issued final orders. Marcus approached her, his face pale but determined. "Director," he whispered urgently, handing her the encrypted logs. "There's another saboteur. If we launch without purging this code, the ship won't make it." Sinclair's eyes narrowed, scanning the evidence with precision. Her expression hardened, and she turned sharply toward Graves, who stood among the engineers, his face calm but his eyes betraying a flicker of unease. "Dr. Graves," Sinclair's voice thundered across the room, "step away from the console. Now." The room froze, whispers rising, the perfect facade cracking as Graves's betrayal came to light. The air inside the advanced research lab was thick with tension, as if the very oxygen had been drained away the moment Dr. Richard Coleman, the head of the mission's research division, discovered Elijah Carter standing at the main console. Equations filled the transparent board behind him, numbers and symbols rushing together into a solution that the entire team had been chasing for months. Richard's voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp, condescending, dripping with outrage. "What the hell do you think you're doing here? You don't belong in this room." Elijah, his hands trembling but his eyes steady, refused to step back. He had just cracked the orbital entry trajectory that had haunted the mission, the very barrier between life and catastrophic failure. For a moment, the lab's humming machines felt like they were holding their breath, waiting to see whether truth would be silenced or finally unleashed. Richard's face grew red with fury as he slammed a fist onto the console, scattering papers across the floor. "You're a delivery boy. Coffee runs, packages, errands, that's all you're here for. You think because you scribbled numbers on a board you can save this mission?" Elijah felt the sting, not just of the insult, but of every door that had been slammed in his face since stepping into this agency. He steadied his voice, though his chest pounded like a war drum. "I solved the equation you couldn't. I found the margin of error in your model, the one that would have torn the ship apart on descent. I don't care what you call me, but if you ignore this, you're dooming the crew." His words cracked the air, and for the first time Richard faltered, his eyes flicking to the numbers behind Elijah as realization gnawed at his arrogance. The confrontation escalated, with Richard stepping closer, his shadow towering over Elijah, every muscle in his face twitching with rage at the idea of being outshone by someone the agency had tossed aside. "You're nothing but a mistake in the system, Carter," he hissed, voice low, venomous. "You think brilliance matters when it comes from someone like you? You don't belong among us, and I'll bury this before anyone ever hears your name." Elijah's pulse thundered in his ears, but there was no retreat in him now. He squared his shoulders, pointing at the calculations glowing on the board. The truth written in numbers no ego could erase. "You can bury me," he said, each word a blade of defiance, "but you can't bury the math. And the director will see it." At that instant, the heavy door hissed open, and the director's voice echoed through the lab, cold, commanding, and ready to unravel the entire charade. The door to the research chamber swung open with a sharp metallic creak, the kind that silenced every voice in the room instantly. Elijah froze mid-sentence, his breath caught between fear and defiance while Richard's finger was still jabbing the air, ready to condemn him further. And then the figure appeared, Director Harrison Cole, a man whose very presence made even the most arrogant scientists shrink into silence. His eyes, cold and piercing, scanned the room slowly until they landed on Elijah, who still clutched the chalkboard marker with the final line of equations glowing behind him like forbidden scripture. The tension in the room thickened as though gravity itself had intensified. Pulling every gaze into that single confrontation, Director Cole stepped forward, his shoes echoing on the polished floor with the finality of a gavel. "What is going on here?" His voice was calm but carried a razor edge, one that cut deeper than any shouted command. Richard straightened his posture, trying to regain authority, and answered quickly. This assistant, this courier, barged into restricted space, tampering with classified equations. He has no clearance, no training to even touch these formulas. He spat the words with the venom of a man desperate to preserve control, while Elijah's chest rose and fell, torn between silence and the courage to defend himself. Cole's eyes narrowed, and he turned slightly toward Elijah, studying him with an unreadable expression. "Is that true? You entered this room without authorization?" The air seemed to squeeze tighter around Elijah's throat, but instead of shrinking, he straightened his back, his voice trembling only at the edges. "Yes, sir. But I didn't barge in.
I was delivering files when I saw the equations."
The solution was wrong. Dangerously wrong. I fixed it. If the mission launched with those numbers, the crew wouldn't make it back alive." His words cracked the silence like thunder, and for the first time Richard flinched. The director turned his gaze toward the chalkboard, his face still an impenetrable mask. He studied the strings of numbers Elijah had written, formulas that twisted and curled like labyrinths of logic no ordinary mind could navigate. Minutes stretched into an eternity as everyone waited, the hum of the lab machines the only sound in the suffocating room. Then, with a faint exhale, Cole stepped closer, his finger tracing the lines Elijah had written. His silence was louder than Richard's earlier accusations, and the weight of it pressed on every chest in the room. Finally, Director Cole turned sharply toward Richard, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. "You're telling me this man is a courier? An errand boy? Because what I see here is a correction only 3 people in this country could have produced, and Elijah Reed just became the 4th. Or perhaps the 1st. Gasps rippled through the lab, eyes widening as the impossible truth began to take form. Richard's face drained of color, his mouth opening but no words finding the courage to escape. The power in the room had shifted, and for the first time, Elijah was no longer the one under scrutiny. Director Cole's words hung in the air like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile hierarchy Richard had tried so desperately to enforce. Richard stumbled forward, his voice cracking with false certainty. "Sir, with all due respect, this boy, he doesn't belong here. He was hired as an assistant, a courier, nothing more. He's exaggerating his abilities to make himself look important." But the desperation in his tone betrayed him, and the staff exchanged nervous glances, sensing the walls of Richard's authority crumbling. Elijah stood still, his hands clenched at his sides, his heart pounding not from fear but from the taste of long-suppressed truth rising to the surface. Cole's gaze shifted to Elijah again, this time sharper, more searching, as though he were trying to peel away layers of deception imposed by others. "What is your background, Mr. Reed?" The question cut through the air, heavy with expectation. Elijah swallowed hard, his voice steady now, unburdened by the shame that had chained him for weeks. "Astrophysics, mathematics, orbital mechanics. PhD at Lincoln University, top of my class." Published research on gravitational trajectory algorithms. Research that was cited by this very agency in its Mars program 2 years ago. The words struck like iron against stone, undeniable and sharp, echoing through the stunned silence of the lab. A murmur spread across the room. Scientists whispering in disbelief, piecing together the fragments of a truth hidden in plain sight. Richard's jaw tightened, his composure unraveling as his last defense collapsed. Cole's expression shifted, a flash of anger breaking through his composure, not at Elijah but at the injustice laid bare before him. Human Resources told me this candidate was unqualified for the Mars division. They told me he was only fit for courier work. Is that what you were told too, Richard? The director's voice was deceptively calm, yet it carried the lethal undertone of a man who would tolerate no lies. Richard stammered, his arrogance melting into panic. Yes, sir. That's what they told us. I assumed... Cole cut him off with a glare so sharp it could have cleaved stone. You assumed because he's young? Because he didn't come from Ivy League halls lined with privilege? Or because his skin doesn't fit the picture you painted of genius? The words landed like a blow, and Richard faltered, unable to answer, his silence damning him louder than any admission. The director turned to Elijah. Weeks later, the agency's headquarters buzzed with a different kind of energy. The once skeptical scientists now gathered eagerly around Elijah, who stood at the center of the Mars Mission Control Hub, his name etched on the glass wall beside the list of lead researchers. Screens glowed with simulations he had designed, each one inching humanity closer to the stars. Gone were the coffee trays and delivery slips. In their place were equations, strategies, and commands that bore his signature. He no longer walked the halls as invisible. His presence was the pulse of the entire project. Director Cole watched from a distance, his expression unreadable, but softened by quiet pride. The whispers of prejudice that once poisoned the agency had been replaced by respect and admiration. Elijah, however, carried no arrogance. Each step he took was grounded in the memory of being overlooked, underestimated, and confined to servitude. It was that memory that fueled his resolve. His rise was not just for himself, but for every young mind who had ever been told they did not belong in rooms of power, discovery, or progress. On the day the final countdown rehearsal succeeded flawlessly, Elijah stepped outside into the evening air. The sky above shimmered with stars, the same stars he had once stared at through a cracked bedroom window in a poor neighborhood where dreams were mocked more often than they were nurtured. Now those same stars felt closer than ever, no longer unreachable but waiting for him. He smiled faintly, whispering to the heavens, "We're coming." And with that, the boy they had called a courier stood as the man leading humanity's journey to Mars. And as Elijah's story reminds us, brilliance knows no color, no wealth, no privilege, it only knows resilience. For every door closed by prejudice, there is a mind strong enough to break through it. If this journey moved you, share it. Comment your thoughts. And let this message travel farther than Mars itself. Never let the world tell you where you don't belong. Prove to it why you do.